welcome back to another SUPboarder video. In this video, we are going to be having a comparison slash review look at the Starboard Sprints. We're going to be looking at the new 2021 19.75 wide board against the 2020 20.75 wide board. We're going to go over some of the features on this board, give you an idea of what Starboard have done to get their boards down sub 20 inches in width, and help you understand if this super narrow 2021 Sprint is the board that you should be looking at this year. Now, if you're interested in looking at these top-end race boards, no doubt you've probably done a lot of research and you've gone online and looked at a lot of stuff already, and there is some really great content out there that I would strongly advise you use as well as this video. Definitely, Michael Booth has done a podcast, it's also on YouTube, where he speaks about this 2021 Sprint and how he's worked with Starboard to refine it. That's definitely worth a watch. Also, definitely go on the Starboard website, there's loads of information on there about the characteristics and why the board feels like it does. But really in this video we're going to be focusing on what these boards are really like to paddle as a real world paddler. We are not the best top end racers for sure, but we really enjoyed paddling both these boards over the last few months. So just to give you a summary about Starboard, if you're getting into racing, Starboard have been making paddleboards for years and years and years, and they have been making really fast, competitive paddleboards, probably for the longest duration out of all the other top brands out there. And they definitely have had more of the podium results than anybody else. Still, to this date, they have a very strong team, a good group of athletes which are helping progress these designs of these boards. There's several boards in the range. Obviously you've got lots of different sizes. There's 14-foot sizes and 12-foot 6 sizes. Most racers are aiming to go towards the 14-foot sizes, still becoming the standard length board. And obviously you can get lots of different widths in each board. The narrower you go, the faster the boards will be, because the less drag that you're going to be pushing through the water. There's two main types of race boards in the Starboard range, and it's true to say the same with many other brands as well. You will have a more of a flat water based race board that's just designed to go as fast as possible in the flatter based conditions, and that is where the Sprint comes in. And then you'll also have a board like the Starboard All-Star, which is a bit more user friendly in more open water or choppier conditions, better for more open water racing, downwinding. And you will have a board almost like an Ace, which is a more specific downwind board designed for catching and riding bumps, open swells, linking up swells, really trying to get the most out of moving downwind with your paddleboard. Now, like I've just said, the Sprint is aimed as a more flat water based board, but you will see riders, top riders like Michael Booth and Connor Baxter, that will be using the Sprints in more open water conditions as well, but obviously it is more technical to use. It will be a faster board in those conditions if you could get the most out of it. For most people, they will find for most all-round open water paddling, they're using All-Star, and for flat water paddling and going as fast as possible in small to moderate chop, they're definitely going to be looking at the Sprint. So the two boards that we've been using over the last month, we've got the two Sprints, the 2020 board down there, that's a 14 by 20.75. A big thanks to Marie Buchanan who lent us that board. It's one of her racing boards, and so we took it off her, dragged it off her hands so we could have a go on that for the month, comparing it to this 2021 version. This version is still a 14-foot long and it's 19.75 inches wide, so it's an inch narrower than the 2020 board we have. The weights of both the boards, they're both coming in at just over 12 kilograms, so fairly lightweight, and these are both carbon sandwich constructions, which are basically the fastest, the best response when you're paddling. And if you're really into performing and getting at the highest level, going towards that carbon sandwich is the sort of thing you need to be looking at. Now, with the 2021 board, there are some subtle changes, and there's also some fairly big changes that are quite easy to spot as well. So up at the nose shape, you'll notice it's a lot squarer than last year's board. There's a lot more volume up at the top section of the nose as well. The bottom section of the nose is actually fairly similar. It does look a little bit different because of the way the graphics, and they wrapped the orange and red sort of nose around the 2020. It does look a little bit different, but it's fairly similar just underneath the nose section for the 2020 and 2021. Having more volume up at the nose and a slightly higher sort of square edge at the front of the nose really does penetrate and goes through the water very well. And then if you do go into chop or any troughs where your nose can get buried, having more volume at the nose pops the board out quicker and allows you to maintain your speed much quicker. Having less volume at the nose, obviously, as it pushes down the water further, and it's going to take longer for the board to pop out, which is why they're saying this board can be used in choppier conditions. Obviously, you're not going to ramp it out into right downwind conditions, but for a lot of people, if they're a fairly good skill level, they're going to be able to use this in some pretty sort of severe chop, definitely up to knee high, I would say. Punching into wind, that nose really does make a difference having more volume up there. Obviously, one big standout in 2021 is all the boards are narrower. If you do bring the width down to any board, you're going to have less wetted surface, which is going to produce less drag, so it's going to make the board paddle faster. Therefore, if you could paddle on a 10-inch wide board, it should be faster than paddling on a 25-inch wide board. But remember, you've got to be able to stay upright and paddle that board efficiently as well, which is something we're going to speak about in a minute. But still, the very nose area and the tail area are the same width as last year's board, so it's really around the midsection here, which is the widest part, obviously, that is going to make the most drag on the board that they've brought down in the width. Still looking at the top of the board before we turn it over, and definitely one of the biggest standouts for me that I noticed straight away, and you can probably even see it on the video there, is the thickness, the depth of these big rails. These big boxy rails, they're about an inch higher or deeper than the 2020 Sprint. It gives you a huge added advantage of stability, which we're going to speak about separately in a minute. But there's definitely a massive change, bigger boxier rail, and obviously that continues slightly towards the front section and a little bit further towards the tail, but really it's around the midsection, a lot more thickness overall. A really nice feature, and definitely something that they have to have had because this board is so narrow, is they've dug out the inside of the rails down in here, so your feet are fairly close. If not, they're probably only half an inch. I'd love to know what the actual real measurement is, but it feels about an inch or less to the side of the board. So they've done a big dugout here, so when you're charging along, especially if it gets choppier, you're going to be riding your feet and legs right against the rails of the board, which give you so much more stability and so much more control than just having to use your feet to control the board. You can actually use your legs to brace against this board as well. You could also do that with the 2020 version as well, but now they've made the recess a little bit deeper. It's just a little bit more comfortable again. So just before we turn it over again, just to go over these rail thickness and the whole board in general, it's a bit thicker, chunkier than last year. They've got to get more volume in a narrower board. Now the problem is if you keep going narrower and narrower, you're losing your volume overall and your board's going to sink down more in the water. Now if your board sinks down in the water more, you're going to have a higher rail to compensate the amount of water and chop and spray that's going to go over and on top of your board and potentially in your board, and obviously that will slow you down with weight and with the actual force of the water hitting the top of the board. So having those higher, thicker rails, more boxy rails throughout from the nose right to the midsection is going to help you go faster and keep the width down on the board overall. Right, let's turn this board over. So look at the bottom board now. If you've been using Starboard or even maybe just following Starboard over the last few years, you'll notice that they have always put a lot of work, a lot of development into the bottom shape of the board, because after all, going to make you paddle the fastest. Concaves have always been in and around the Starboard race range, whether it's open water or flat water, but this year the concave in the middle has been subtled out a little bit. They say it's faster than the 2020 board because they've smoothed out the concave, made it a little bit more, accelerates a little bit more. Concaves in general, they will really help the stability, but if you have too big a concave, you can suffer when it comes to the speed and the performance of the board. For a designer, obviously, of race boards, you're always looking for that perfect happy medium between stability and being able to paddle the board hard and feel comfortable, and actually speed of the board that it can physically track as fast as possible through and on top of the water. Now, I'm not going to argue at all. I think Starboard do a lot of research and development on their boards. I know they paddle them a lot with their top riders, and they have really good test conditions, test places that they do their paddling. So if they think this shape is faster than 2020, I'm not going to argue with them, and I think this design obviously is being put in place just because of that. Other stuff that they kept the same as the 2020 board is the side planes, which are the bits here to the side of the reduced concave that they've got on the 2021. The side planes are the same and the chamfers are the same as the 2020 board. Now this side planes here gives the board a little bit more of a smoother feel. It helps the transition, so when you're changing your paddle sides over, and the chamfered rails here are really going to help when you go to your secondary stability, which I'm going to speak about on a completely different subject. Definitely having these flat side planes are really needed, because obviously when you go to change your paddle strokes, especially if you're on this board, being only 19.75 wide, you do need to have it as comfortable as possible when you are changing sides, because the board is just obviously narrow. Before we move to the back of the board, you can quite easily see the drainage holes that they've put in perfect place, so the water drains out nice and quickly. Any water you do get over the deck, even if it comes over these big boxy rails, the water drains out nice and easily. And I actually quite like it because it's very close to my feet, so I actually do have a reference point of where I'm putting my feet around in relation to the drainage holes as well. This 2021 board has got slightly more tail kick at the back of the board than the 2020 board. Tail kick is obviously the slope as the tail goes up at the back of the board. Now, if you're trimming your weight back when you've got a board with more tail kick, you are going to bring the nose up. Therefore, if you're using it in open water, downwind conditions, surfing bumps, having a board with more tail kick is going to be easier to surf than having a board with flatter tail kick. I think this is definitely where I think the rider Michael Booth has really had a big part to play in this, because I know he likes to use this board in a lot of conditions. Ideally, in all of his races, I think he would try and be on this board, but having a little bit more tail kick will allow him to widen his race window he'd be able to use this board in. So definitely if it's more of an open water, downwind, a little bit of flat water racing board, I can see they'll be using this board equally, if not more, than the boards like the All-Star, and that's why they've changed the tail rocker or the tail kick this year. Also means that when you do step back turns, it's easier to get the nose up and pivot around as well. The tail shape of the board is fairly similar to last year's. You've still got a fairly flat exit of the water there. It's really hard for people to draft. You have a very clean release of water, square back edge, everything you want in a race board, just as fast as possible, no drag off the tail, making it really hard for people to draft or stick right on your bum. So turning the board on its side, you can really get an idea of how narrow this board is. What I want to talk about now is actually paddling it on the water. What is it like to paddle, and what is it like to paddle as a real world paddler? What I mean by that is not a full-on top racer, somebody who's fairly competent, likes to paddle fast, knows or is looking at improving their paddle stroke. What is it like to use, and mainly on flat water here, because that's really when we were able to test it. We were using the two boards on flat water. So when you jump on this board, obviously you're not going to expect it to be the most stable board on the water, and definitely it takes you a while to actually just understand you're standing on a board that's virtually the same width as your comfortable stance. There's no other board to the side of it. You've got very little gap between your feet. And it looks even stranger if somebody's paddling straight towards you on the 19.75 board. There is no width to this board at all. Now straight away, the board's going to paddle fast because of that, because it has got a reduced wetted surface. But the really big thing I want to speak about now is the stability of this board. Now, before we go into stability, a lot of you are probably aware, but if you aren't aware, you have primary stability and you have secondary stability. Primary stability is you stand on the board on flat water and you have a little rock, and that's your first primary. It's the first bit of stability you feel. Does the board feel unstable? Does it feel very, very planted? Obviously a board 38 wide, 32 inches wide, like your average all-round flat water board, or maybe getting into surfing board, they're pretty stable. They have a big primary stability. Race boards generally don't have very much primary stability because they're just narrow in the first place, especially this one at 19.75. But then you have this thing called secondary stability, which is where the rails, the big higher boxy rails, as you roll over and you feel uncomfortable because your primary stability, your secondary stability actually stops you from falling over. And that is something that all race boards, not just Starboard, work on all the time, having a good secondary stability. So when you're racing and paddling and generally doing your paddle stroke, you might find you have a little wobble, which is a bit of your primary stability, but your secondary stability keeps you upright and keeps you paddling. This board has a astronomical, I'm going to use that in a SUPboarder work review, astronomical amount of secondary stability. So much so that if you see the video clips of me standing and rocking the board on its side, I can almost get the whole rail in the water, so the water starts to come in to the actual side of the board. It has that much secondary stability, and that is because of this big boxy rail. So when you rock and you lose your balance from your primary stability and you go into your secondary stability, there is a massive window of you keeping you upright. So much so I actually thought the 2021 board was actually a little bit more stable than the 2020 board, even though that was a wider board. The primary stability on the 2020 board is a little bit more because it's wider, but the secondary stability, because of this bigger, boxier rail, is better on the 2021 board. So that is the first thing to talk about. Stability is astronomical, again, use that word, with the 2021 Sprint. Very noticeable, really noticeable on the test that we did. Really good fun and an amazing feeling to be able to push the board over that far and it only being 19.75 wide. But there is a really important thing to talk about with this primary stability, about feeling comfortable when you're paddling and you're trying to paddle fast on a narrow board, because you need to be able to paddle your board comfortably, put a good amount of power into your strokes, and also you need to be able to change sides and feel at ease at changing sides and getting the power back into the paddle to actually push you along. Now, this is where the primary stability, I feel, gets affected a little bit more, and that comfort of making sure the board paddles well. And this is where I would say that definitely an advanced racer will be able to split the line and pull away a lot more. The advanced racers are going to be able to find it easier to use their board of this width, obviously because they're skills, but also the speed difference changes quite a lot here. Now, we did a lot of testing and we sort of all came up with the same sort of conclusion, that this board is a quick board. It is a very quick pickup, but it didn't feel as comfortable, or we weren't as comfortable on a board that was 20.75 wide. So for us personally, testing it back to back, we found the speeds virtually the same. Maybe some of the average speeds or the peak speeds might have changed a little bit, pushing the 2021 ahead. But on most of the occasions, we found them both comparable to each other. And that really comes down to us feeling comfortable at using a board of that width. If we were a more competitive, a higher level paddler, really tuning in that board, maybe spending longer with the board, there's no doubt you're going to be able to paddle faster on a narrow board. That's no argument. But you're going to have to put the time in. You're going to have to really focus on training yourself with your board. And you're going to also have to focus on picking the right conditions you're going to be using your board as well. Because if you're not upright, you're not paddling efficiently, even if it is a narrow board, a lighter board with better design, it's not going to be as fast as a board that you're more comfortable on. So that is a really, really big thing to point out in this video. You've got to be paddling a board that you're comfortable on. Having said that, with the stability and everything, I was amazed how comfortable this board felt. I would completely agree with Starboard saying 80 kilos is what they would recommend to this. If you're a really, really good racer, you could probably push up the 82, 83 kilos. Bear in mind, you're going to be affecting the volume a little bit more and how it sits in the water and how you're putting the power on to the width of the board. It will sink more, which is quite interesting. If you watch Bo here doing a little sprint work, you can see how much the tail is sinking on the board. He's a heavier rider. Therefore, if you went for the slightly bigger board with more volume, a tiny bit more width, it would stop that board from sinking, and it would probably be a faster board for him having a slightly wider board compared to a narrow board. So all of these things you've got to think about all of the time when you go to choose your race board. The big thing I think you want to come away from this is, for most of you paddlers, if you are talking 75 kilos upwards, the 21 wide board is going to be a real golden size board, I think, for a lot of you out there. And so on, if you're a little bit heavier looking for the slightly wider board, this 19.75 is a super fast, amazing board to use. Definitely sub 75 kilos, unless you're just using it on flat water all the time. You could push into 80 kilos, 82 kilos, or you're an advanced paddler. But for a lot of you out there, what showed me by using these two boards is the bigger size, the slightly wider boards in these sprints are going to be really quick, massive secondary stability, going to get you out in a lot more conditions than just your flat water conditions because of that secondary stability, and they're going to be a lot of fun, and they're going to get you paddling faster, definitely, than previous year's sprints. And we know racing isn't just about going in a straight line. Definitely when it comes to step back turns, probably I would say that the boards felt exactly the same. The tail shapes and widths and dimensions are virtually the same between the 2020 and the 2021, and definitely wouldn't say there was any difference at all in the step back turns or going to pivot or buoy turns. Maybe the secondary stability as you come back around the midsection was a little bit easier again with the 2021 because of that higher boxier rail. Unfortunately, because of the conditions in test window and various COVID restrictions that were going on in the UK and around the world right now, we couldn't get out into a lot of more open water conditions to test this board. Usually we do pros and cons. I'm not really going to talk about pros and cons because, well, the con, what is the con? It's narrow, it's hard to stand on. What is the pro? It's super fast. You know the pros and cons of this board. Starboard do so much R&D, so much development on their boards. Value for money, that's an interesting one. Well, it's an expensive board, isn't it? They always are. As I said, there's a lot of work goes into these boards, a lot of design, a lot of shapes. There's a lot of materials in there as well. It's a big old board. They are up there on the price point. There are cheaper price points available in certain sizes. If you want a fast board and you want a very competitive board at the top of the market, at the top of the paddling podium, these are the sort of prices you're going to have to pay, unfortunately. In summary, Starboard have put a lot of development in 2021 to this board. Great to see, and yes, every development has really worked well. The narrow board 19.75, you're still going to have to be a good paddler to use it. Most paddlers could go on and paddle it, but could you really get the most out of it? That is the question you need to ask yourself. I think a lot of you out there, a huge amount of you, are going to really enjoy the slightly bigger sizes. It's still going to give you that speed benefits over the 2020, but you're not going to have to concentrate on the paddle work so much as you would do with this, the super narrow one. I really hope you found this review interesting and informative, and it's helped you understand if this type of board is the sort of board you can be looking at. Definitely for more information, I would say go on the Starboard website. Their facts and figures that they've put on about their boards, their riders' weights, their recommended rider weights and everything, I completely agree with. So if you're looking at buying a super fast race board and you're fitting in a certain weight category, definitely check out all the information on the Starboard website. Any questions and comments, as always, please let us know. Thank you very much, and we'll see you on another SUPboarder or SUPboarder Pro video very soon.